I would like to introduce myself. My name is Josh Houry, and I'm the Community Relations Coordinator for the Saskatchewan SPCA. On behalf of my colleagues at the Society, I would like to welcome you to the Indigenous History in Animal Welfare webinar. I would also like to begin this evening by acknowledging that the land where I am tonight is treaty land. It's Treaty 4 territory, which is the original land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and of course the homeland of the Métis. I would like to pay my respects to the ancestors of this land that we now know as Saskatchewan. This evening we will hear from two speakers, Elder Betty McKenna and Canine Action Project's Megan Schmitz will present to us this evening. Betty and Megan will share with us information around the roles that animals have and continue to have and play in Indigenous cultures. We'll also learn about how important animals are to Indigenous peoples, and we'll also get to find out how animal welfare organizations are supporting Indigenous communities and their animals. I would like to introduce you now to our speakers. Elder Betty McKenna is an Anishinaabe born in Opaswayak, also known as the Pas, Manitoba, and her family reserve is Sepatawayak. She follows the traditions of her people, speaks her traditional language, conducts numerous ceremonies, and gathers medicines. She's involved in many research projects and is a lecturer at the First Nations University of Canada and Luther College in Regina. Joining Elder Betty is Megan Schmitz, Vice President of Canine Action Project. Megan joined CAP in 2014 and has over 12 years of experience in the animal welfare sector. Megan is proud to be Métis and lives in Prince Albert with her husband, 3 dogs, 2 cats, and a revolving door of foster animals. Welcome, Elder Betty and Megan. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Elder Betty, I will turn it over to you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to acknowledge that I received tobacco on behalf of the SPCA to share the ancestral knowledge that I was gifted from my ancestors, my grandmothers, my uncles, parents. So what I want to do is acknowledge that when we do a tobacco tie, the tobacco is in the middle, and that's us. We're in the middle of 4 directions, and when we pull that, it's a little square. We pull the 4 pieces up and tie it. We are acknowledging the things that we get from the 4 directions, and when we acknowledge that the 4 directions and let them know that we are in the middle, they always hold us there in the middle. And no matter where you are in life, you're never going to be lost. You always know you're in the middle of 4 directions. So with that, I would like to start with a short prayer to welcome everyone. And I'll speak in my language if people don't mind. Miigwech Jamanto, miigwech ni mamaki, mayo kisika, kikitama kizmin, kichimanto, mano kitama kinemason, gisa winimigo. Gisa Winneman, Gisa Winnemigo, Mamtawegan, Miigwech Jamanto, Chimikwich, Chimikwich. Thank you. I'd like to speak about our animals. And what I have to speak about first is Mother Earth, because that's where our animals produced Mother Earth. We continue to see our animals work closely with Mother Earth and become Mother Earth. So layer upon layer, our animals have built Mother Earth. The soil and the animals do a continual cycle and have had done for thousands and thousands of years. And our people always say, "Kinike koke wasasek," which means everything is in a circle. So everything here is in a circle. Everything that we live with is in a circle. And animals have shown us from the beginning of time how to work with Mother Earth and reap the benefits of Mother Earth, and also how to support one another. You know, I often think nowadays when I hear people say the animals they're roaming into our neighborhoods and they're attacking children in the yards and they're in the roof, like the little, what do they call those little, some people call them little bandits, little raccoons, and all the other things that they talk about. Well, you know, for thousands of years, that was their space, that was their home, that was their place. Can you imagine what it must be like for them? Where are they to go? Where are they to be? Should they change who they are? Because it would be convenient for us. Because we've decided that we're going to live here, that we're going to build roads, that we're going to build houses, that we're going to have decks and garbage things that we put out. And it's something somebody should think about. Where do you think they'd go? This is their place. We've invaded it. For thousands of years, this has been their trails. This has been their area. And because they choose to walk through it, we're going to either annihilate them or put out poison or do whatever it is that they do to make these poor animals feel like they don't belong here on Earth anymore. They still contribute to this world much more than we do. Much, much more. You know, our people, we looked at all those animals and we knew that those were our helpers. We call them our older brothers and sisters because they give us so much. They give their whole lives for us. When we talk about our dotems, and our dotems is like a clan, our clan system. And in the West, they call them the totems, but in my language, we call them our dotem. They're based on those animals and the respect and the honor that we have for them because of how they lived their lives and how they still live their lives. They haven't changed. You take birds. They're still migrating the same way they've always migrated. And they don't have to learn that migration pattern off an older one that's gone and showed them. It's right in them when they're born. It's embedded in their very being, that migration pattern. So that's how they know. What if we were that smart? What if our bodies were that great? Heavens, what we could do. Just think about it. And so we give them that honor of saying, we want to be of that dotem. We want to live our lives and honor them. So to honor them, we show great respect for them. One of the greatest things that you can get is a feather. And there's many different types of feathers. Most people the common feather is an eagle feather, but there are other feathers that are gifted to young people and different people. And they give their whole body to you. Some of them, you know, they're all their fur. Is my buddy the wolf behind me. Their fur, their bones, we use those as tools. And even our whistles were made out of their wings, the bone in their wings. One of the greatest things that we have our healers use is when they fan people to help, that they use the wings. They make those fans out of the wings. And you know, you take a look at geese. I was always told those who show leadership. That goose will fly ahead and all the rest will honk and follow. And then it'll drop back. No longer the leader. It'll drop right to the back. And another one takes his place and they'll all honk yet. You know, they're saying, we're following you. Every leader, they'll say, we're following you. They don't break off and say, we're not going to follow you. We're only going to follow the one that was there before. They know that one needs, it's done its job. It needs to rest now. It needs to be in the back. So what if we did that to everybody? What if everybody was our leader? What if we looked to everyone and said, there's leadership in each and every person in this world. There's not one person that doesn't have a leadership skill. You know, I see those little kids come into schools because I'm in the school system too here in Regina. And I see all those little leaders come in. Some are quiet and shy. Some are rowdy. Some are little clowns. But they're all leaders. Just like those little geese. And they should all be told they have that skill and ability, and to give them free rein so they find that ability that they have and they're comfortable with it. They find out they're all little geese. So when we had our animals that flew, our flyers, and we hold ceremony when we find them deceased, like an eagle. We'll put that eagle in a good way. And the same as if it's a hawk and they bring us messages. They bring you messages. Our owls bring us messages. There's no such thing as a bad animal. They're all good. They all have their place. And we need to open our hearts and our minds to understand how they are good. It's us that's formed an opinion about them. It's not their opinion about themselves. They would have a different opinion. Often wonder what their opinion is about us. They're still helping us, irregardless, which is wonderful. They create the very soil we walk on, you know. We're told to walk with a padded foot like a cougar or a bear, because that's where the ancestors are. The ancestors have made up the first 7 feet of Mother Earth. It's our ancestors. And it continues to grow. And when that soil grows, then we get other things that grow, including us, including our people. When I was younger, you get taken out, you know, I lived in the bush. I lived around the bush all the time. And then you were told, who's with you out here? First thing you're always told, who's out here with us? Take a look. You look at the ground, scanning the ground, see who's here. Who's here? Rabbits are here. Deer are here. Oh, what's that? Oh, I guess it must be a coyote. You knew it all. You knew they left their calling cards and you could identify all of them. Bear is here. How long ago? Oh, it's been a while. But you could tell if it was fresh too. So there was never anything to worry about. But they'd all leave their calling card. And you had to know what those were, so that you could adjust how far you go into the bush, where you go into the bush, where the trail was, and not to stay on their trails, because their trails were their trails. They made them down to the water to go drink. One of the coolest things is go down at night and paddle through the river and watch the animals come and take a drink. See the eyes at different levels. Their eyes will glint in the moonlight. It's very pretty. And you know that you want them to be well. You want them to be healthy. You don't want anything to happen to them. I once heard my dad talk about the circle of death. He was so against poison. People would get scared of things We started moving into communities. We're going to put out poison for the wolves. We're going to put out, and the minute you start doing that, my dad said, you just create that 100-mile circle of death. One poisoned animal, poisoned birds, poisoned rodents. It just gets bigger and bigger. Bigger and bigger. We've got 100-mile circle. Poisoned animals and death. Our people were silly. They'd never do that to us, you know. They clean up. You would see those birds circling, they'll go clean up. They clean up the highway, they clean up everything. So people don't. I've seen them just fly by on the highway and never think to go pull that poor animal off or leave a tobacco offering or anything. But those animals don't. Those birds don't. They'll clean up. So that's why we would honor them and respect them. And we wanted to be like them. We are sacred names. A common name people will say is an Indian name, but I call them a sacred spiritual name that we're given. And it's not me that gives people names. When I hold my pipe ceremony, it's the ancestors, it's that person's ancestors that give them the name. They know their sacred spiritual name. I don't. And those are brought to them by those animals. Their spirit animal will bring that name to them. That ancestor comes in the form of that spirit animal and will give them that name. And that spirit animal will help them in so many different ways. So many different ways. And so when we look at all the things that they give us, our tools, our drums, our rattles, our whistles, when we do those sacred ceremonies, those animals are there. Their life has changed. They're not dead. They've transformed into a sacred whistle that's there at a Sundance. They're changed into that drum that's there for the sacred ceremonies, whether it's a sweat lodge or full moon ceremony or a powwow. It's still living, still sounding. Its heartbeat is there, matching the heartbeat of Mother Earth from where it came. And we just don't even realize that that's where we came from too. I was always told I was moose meat and blueberries. That's what my parents were eating when they created me. My spirit came from the Great Spirit, of course, and never had a beginning and never had an end. So, but my body, yeah, it's limited, just like moose meat and blueberries were. And so, you know, when you think of all the things that's in Mother Earth and all the things that's in us, water, salt, iron, zinc, copper. Yeah, we have copper. And if we didn't have those little things, we would be unwell. There'd be something wrong with our bodies. But we have all those things that are in Mother Earth. They reside in us. So we must be a child of the earth. Lisa's body and can't be anything else. Just like that deer, that moose, that coyote, that wolf. If you ever encounter a wolf in the wild, they have a strange, graceful thing that they do. They'll stop and look at you. They'll put one leg back and they'll dip their head and they'll turn and they'll run. And I've seen it happen. I've had it happen to me at least 4 times. And it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And you know it's respect. You know that they're saying, you respect me, I respect you. And they leave. It's incredible, incredible to see. And they can do phenomenal things, our animals, you know. Moose can swim. They're the best swimmers I've ever seen. Scared the life out of me when one chased me in the canoe. I'm still leery of moose, especially in the fall. And I won't go out canoeing wherever there's any moose. But because they're better swimmers than me. Good thing I paddled fast. But all our animals had gifts that they gave us. As human beings, we took those gifts. Our people took those gifts. And we use it in our life. And we're grateful and we're thankful and we hold ceremony for them. And we'll always hold ceremony for them because we know how important they are. We know how hard it is for them right now. So hard for them. Right now, it's, you know, it's those forest fires. We're losing them. We're going to be losing so many. We might even have some that become extinct. We've already had that happen. So we need to take a look at our environment and what are we doing about our environment? And instead of thinking we have the right to put up buildings and roads and do all kinds of things that's going to wreck their habitat, when they have no say because no one's listening. Well, I think we're doomed. Because they may survive and struggle to do so. But without us doing the right thing, without us doing the right honoring, respecting, well, where are we going to be? They provided us food, our medicine. You know, they show us where the good medicine is. They've always done that. The bear is the medicine animal. It'll dig up the medicine you need that year. And yet, people malign poor bear. And I'm no different than anybody else, you know. I live in a house in the city and drive a vehicle. But I remember what it was like when I was a kid. There was no fear of any of them. But we know that the earth holds the key to our animals, our birds. And they provide, and we're told from the time we were very, very young. There's a story, and the story is about, it's called Berries In and Bushes Out. It's a very quick little story. This little bird was way up in the trees and he would eat the berries on the top. And all day long, that's all he did was eat berries. And he'd watch the bear and he'd watch the eagle get a big fish and eat him. He said, I want to do that. I want to learn how to fish. I want to eat like that and just rest the rest of the day. So the bear went and said to the eagle, he wants to learn how to fish. So the eagle said, well, tell him to come and get on my back. I'll show him how. So he got on the eagle's back and the eagle flew up. He watched the river get smaller and smaller and smaller. It goes just a little silver streak. And he said, now keep it an eye because I'm going to start dropping. Eagle come down. He said, when you see silver V's, those are fish. He saw it. And the eagle come down, grabbed that fish and threw it on the bank. Oh, he said, I can do that. So he started flying and he flew and he flew and he flew. But that river didn't get like a little tiny silver thread. Still was a big river. But there he saw it. That silver bee. So he come down as fast as he could, and he smacked right into that big stone that he thought was a fish in the river. Bear waded out and got him and brought him to shore, and said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I saw the silver bee. I thought it was a fish." He said, "You didn't get high enough," he said. And he said, "But I tried. He said, "Oh," he said, I wanted that fish so bad." And he said, "Why do you want fish?" And he said, "Well, because I'm tired of eating every day, all day long up in the trees." And he said, "But because you do that, we love you." I said, "What?" He said, "We love you." He said, "And look at those humans." He said, "They're so happy down there." And the little bird looked, and he said, "They're picking berries." He said, "Yeah, they are." He said, "It's because of you, they're picking berries. You gave them those berries." "I did? You gave me the berries I had yesterday." "I did?" "Yeah. Didn't you know? For birds, berries in, bushes out. We always get more berries. Continue to eat up there, little bird." So we were always told, don't pull down those trees and take those big berries at the top. They belong to that little bird. He's going to make you more trees, and you can pick more berries. So that's how it works for us. And that's how it works for them. So I'm going to let people ask questions now if they want to. And I will.
Thank you, Elder Betty, for sharing that knowledge with us. And that was a nice story. I really enjoyed the one at the end. Thank you. There is an opportunity here to ask questions. Of course, you can pop your questions into the chat if you'd prefer to do it that way, but you can also use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Just pop your questions in there, and we will get those questions to Elder Betty. I guess in the meantime, Elder Betty, we can maybe talk a little bit about some of the points that you made about, the fact that we are, as humans, infringing on the territory of the animals. And, it's something that happens continually. I mean, our cities here in this province are growing, and I think that's probably true for many places across the country. So what advice do you have to folks who are maybe hoping to help ensure that animal territory is or that we know this is animal territory, and that we can still pay respects to the animals and everything that they do for us?
Well, in cities, I think we should concentrate on making more green spaces for them, and then so that they have some habitat instead of, in your yard. They will have a
Concrete
place.
jungle.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And it's quite doable. I think, if you can plant trees, you can plant an area where you can have them and have just natural habitat grow.
Mhm.
A lot of times we've got a lot of invasive species as well when it comes to the things that deer and moose and things eat. So it makes them have to forage further and longer looking for food because of all the different plants that have been brought in from other countries that are not edible for animals to eat.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely some food for thought there.
I was just going to start with acknowledging that I really want to thank everybody, first of all, for the SaskSPCA for inviting us to be part of this, and for everybody for attending. And that I do want to mention that I am Métis, but I only recently started reconnecting with my Métis culture and roots. So I feel very much still as an outsider to the First Nations communities that we work in. So my presentation, and this presentation comes from also personal experience, my own perspective, and also Canine Action Project as a whole, because I've been with CAP for so long and I've experienced all of these things with CAP, with other volunteers. and heard their story. So I kind of want to share some of that in the presentation. And so for anybody that hasn't heard of CAP, we are a charity in Saskatchewan, and we work with First Nations communities to provide programs and tools and resources to create more sustainable and happier and healthier dog populations. And there's a little bit of history behind our logo. Our original logo is harder to find now. So we actually redesigned it, and I think it was late 2016 that we worked with some stakeholders from the communities that we have partnered with over the years to get some insight and some feedback on some ideas that we were throwing around for our logo. And because Monique and Monique is one of the founding members of Canine Action Project, and I'm, I guess, one of the core members, we are both Métis, and many of our volunteers are Métis or Indigenous. And so it was really important to us to be reflective of not only our volunteers, but the communities that we work with, and that this logo is a symbol of growing and learning and continuing to grow as not only individuals, but as an organization. And so we're really proud of our logo. It is the medicine wheel, and it does have the eagle feathers. And then actually the paw print in the middle is Monique's dog, her old dog that had passed away. That's his paw print, and that's tattooed on her. So it's just a really special logo. So again, just for people that don't know about us, what we try to do is provide these programs and resources and tools to the communities and to the individual pet owners through a One Health approach. And anybody that doesn't know what One Health is, it recognizes the links between human and animal and environmental health and community well-being. So you can't have healthy dogs without having a healthy community, and you can't have a healthy community without having healthy dogs. And One Health is not just specific to CAP, it's actually a globally used term, a phrase, and approach to things. So what we try to do is that with all of these programs, in the end, we're going to have healthier, safer, happy, balanced communities and environments for not only just the dogs, but also the people. And our programs are designed to empower people, not just leaders, but also the individual pet owner, so that they can set themselves up for success. And I just want to take 2 seconds. My dogs are in the room with me, because if they're not, they're really annoying and they whine and they pace back and forth. So if you hear noises in the back, it's my dogs. I apologize to everybody. So who we are, Canine Action Project was formed in 2011 and became a registered charity and a nonprofit organization in 2012. So I've only been with CAP since 2014. Monique is actually one of the co-founders of the organization. We are volunteer driven. We've got over 400 volunteers in our database, and we work in partnership with First Nations communities, veterinary personnel, university researchers, healthcare professionals, and animal welfare organizations. And we don't receive any government level funding. We actually our funding comes from fee-for-service agreements with the communities that we partner with, grants, fundraising, and donations. So just some really quick stats about CAP, just to kind of give you a background. CAP has worked with 15 First Nations communities throughout Saskatchewan since its inception. We've held 16 on-site spay-neuter clinics in 11 communities since 2012, and our most recent one was just in Mosquito a couple weeks ago, and we have one coming up in Little Pine First Nation in September. We did one mass vaccine clinic in Moosomin First Nation in 2016. Over 3,500 animals have been spayed and neutered through our various programs. And we do run a pet food bank for the communities that we partner with, and over 150,000 pounds of pet food has been distributed to the communities in the last 3 years. So we move a lot of food. It's very heavy. There we go. So for anybody that is outside of the picture here, there's various efforts that have gone into play over the years to try to control the animal population in First Nations communities. And so a couple of these measures are culls or dog shoot days, having rescues go in and do rescue missions or dog pulls, large volume spay neuter programs, and mandatory tethering. And I just want to touch on a couple of these things and explain a little bit about the pros and cons of each of them. So dog culls, I mean, we don't want to see dogs being shot, especially healthy, friendly dogs that aren't really causing any issues in the community. these calls can cause a lot of trauma, not only for the animals, not only for the people outside that know that it's happening and can't do anything, the people inside that know that it's happening and can't do anything, but also the shooter. We share this story often. There's a gentleman in Sturgeon Lake First Nation, and he shared his story with us years ago, and we've asked permission to share his story over the years. And he used to be the dog shooter for Sturgeon Lake. And he said at first, it wasn't bad. I was doing a service for my community. I was helping keep it safe. I was putting food on the table for my family. It didn't really bother him. But it didn't take long for those dogs to come back to him in his dreams and ask him, why did you do that to me? And they would haunt him. And to this day, he said, I could never shoot a dog. Even if a dog was suffering and it needed to be put out of his misery, he's like, I can't be that person that pulls the trigger. I would have to find somebody else, because now he has an element of PTSD. Additionally, it teaches or normalizes violence, that little kids will see their beloved pet being shot, or will know that their pet was shot, and they learn to grow up to just know that, wow, an animal is replaceable, I'll get another one. So, calls, kind of the whole idea is not a great approach. And it typically is a last resort for communities. Like, it's not that communities want to go around and shoot dogs. But I mean, especially now since COVID, there's been an influx of surrendered animals and less adoptions because everybody got dogs during COVID. So now it's getting harder and harder to find rescues or shelters to intake unwanted animals. And so calls are kind of, unfortunately, they're probably going to start becoming a norm again. And for a little while there, they weren't. And I can touch more on that a little bit later. So the other issue with calls, and same with rescue missions or dog pulls, is that they tend to focus on the town site areas. So that's where the concentrated population is of dogs. That's where the concern is, because there's more people walking around, there's kids, and there tends to be more dogs. But the struggle is the dogs that are in the town site tend to be more friendly, and they tend to be more socialized with both people and with other animals. So when you remove those dogs, whether it's by culling or whether it's by having them removed by a rescue or them going into a shelter, or whatever that method may be, the struggle is now that we've opened up resources for dogs from the outside, which may not be as friendly or as socialized or as outgoing. Now these dogs have moved in, and there's actually statistical data to prove that. And the same thing happens in wild animal populations as well, when mass calls happen for things like that. So now we've actually created probably a bigger problem, because now we've got potentially more aggressive or under socialized or more feral dogs coming into the town site where it's more concentrated, and breeding. The other thing is, when you're removing dogs in whatever the method may be, now you've got animals that are still left behind, that are still intact, they're still unvaccinated, so they're still able to breed, they're still able to spread disease and parasites and worms and things like that. And so the cycle is just going to continue. Typically, when you have culls or dog pulls or rescue missions, people will give up older dogs, adult dogs, because they're bigger and because they've kind of like, the novelty has worn off for some of them. And so they'll give up adult dogs, but then they'll replace them with new puppies. And so now we're starting all over again from square one. And we also have to think about the fact that adult dogs tend to have stronger immune systems. So when we're bringing in new puppies that have very immature immune systems, they are more susceptible to diseases. So culling and dog rescue missions and dog pulls, things like that, those tend to be reactive responses to a dog bite incident, dogs packing up, lots of dog fighting, or just an overpopulation of dogs. But they don't prevent any of those future problems. And while, rescues coming in and doing these dog pulls is great, and that's great that it's giving those animals a second chance, I think in the last few years, it's really only become a thing probably in the last 10, I'd say 8 to 10 years, that's been a more common thing, especially when communities announce that they're going to be culling dogs, then the rescues will come in and they'll try to save all these animals. But now we've kind of created an expectation that the rescues will always come to the rescue and to prevent culling or things like this. And we're essentially, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. And that's kind of what's been created now. So it's a little bit counterproductive. Like, yes, you are giving those animals the second chance and you're helping the animal, but it's not going to help the community and it's not going to help the people. It's not going to prevent anything in the long term. As for large volume spay-neuter programs, I mean, CAP was founded on doing spay-neuter clinics, but it really didn't take us long to figure out that spay-neuter is just one piece of the puzzle. The reason being is because, for one, spay-neuter is very expensive, especially these on-site clinics. Even transporting animals to vet clinics and, you know, bringing in 5 to 10 dogs at a time or something like that. It's very expensive. It's very exhaustive on resources. It relies heavily on volunteers and charity, essentially. Very large undertaking. The results will be felt longer than as opposed to if you just do a dog call or do rescue missions or dog pulls, but it's not the sole solution, because free roaming dogs are very common on First Nations communities, which is in line with traditional beliefs. Like, First Nations people never tied up their dogs or never had them in a fence. They just free roamed. They lived with the people and they were protectors and they were hunters and they were companions and they were guardians. And so, you know, the idea that everybody should just tie up their dog or that everybody should build a fence on the reserve is so much easier said than done. And it's also not true to First Nations tradition and history and culture. So when you've got kind of all these different things in play, when you've got free roaming dogs, I mean, they are higher risk for getting hit by a car. They are higher risk for getting attacked by wildlife or other dogs. People move, people pass away and their animals are left behind. You know, there's all these kinds of different scenarios. And so thinking that you can just go in and spay and neuter everything and the problem will be solved is unfortunately not the case. So it's a piece of the puzzle, but the puzzle is a very big picture. And then, of course, mandatory tethering. You know, nobody really likes to see life on a chain. That's not humane. Dogs are typically very bored. They become more aggressive. They become more territorial. Being tied up, if they're not monitored properly, it can cause injuries. It can cause suffocation, things like that. And the practice has actually been outlawed in many places throughout North America because of all of these things. So we don't encourage, like Canine Action Project doesn't encourage mandatory tethering of dogs. We'd rather see free roaming dogs. So the other thing is there's a big misconception that all the dogs on the reserve or most of the dogs on the reserves are strays or abandoned or unowned. And CAP has actually done demographics, and I believe, like right off the top of my head, I believe we've done them at 13 communities in Saskatchewan, where we've actually gone door to door and we've documented all the animals. We've identified who's owned, who's not owned. We've identified who's had vaccines, who's been spayed, neutered. And the data that we've collected, and we're not the only ones that have done this. I know other organizations across Canada and North America really have done this too. And they have found that about less than 1% of the dogs are truly stray or abandoned. So the idea of stray is more of a nuisance, right? If the dog is getting into garbage, or if it's hanging around at somebody's house and stealing their dog's food, if it's skinny or sickly or injured, if it's not wearing a collar, which most dogs that are free roaming on the reserve don't wear collars, and they immediately think that it's stray. And so for a lot of people from the outside, they assume that dog is essentially not owned, not being cared for, and that it is free for the taking. And that's not true. We've been working in our communities for so many years that we know these dogs, we know these families, we know these people, and they love their dogs. They take very good care of them. And I always try to tell people that, like, the idea of what a good pet owner is or what responsible pet ownership is can be subjective, because, like, for example, I live in the city and I have 3 dogs and I don't walk my dogs very often, and that's probably not a good thing. I've been told by people like, oh my God, the fact that you don't walk your dogs every day, like, I can't believe that you would do that to them. And I'm lucky that my dogs are couch potatoes and they're pretty content without being walked every day. But, you know, in somebody else's eyes, I might not be a top tier pet owner because I don't walk my dogs every day. And for some people, I mean, and it depends on the personality of the animal too. You have to think about that, is that some dogs don't want attention from you. Like some dogs just, as long as you're meeting their basic needs, they're totally content to just live their lives. And so we have to kind of think about that. I think that's really important to make sure we've always got that question in the back of our mind. Like, what does it mean to be a good pet owner? And what are the basic requirements that the animal needs? And are those needs being met? And try to go from there and build on that. So a big thing is colonization and animal welfare. So I think everybody now knows what colonization, residential schools, and the 60 scoop are. And these are, we can look at these examples, and we can see the intergenerational trauma and how it has directly affected the animals. So in order to understand and work towards humane, positive, sustainable solutions with First Nations people, with the Indigenous cultures, even with Métis settlements, even really essentially with anybody, no matter what their background is, we must first understand what the root of the problem is. And right now, dogs are a symptom of a human-caused issue. And that we know, and science tells us this, that human welfare directly affects animal welfare. So if a person is, not living in the best living situation, maybe homeless, or maybe on their way to homelessness, maybe living in squalor, maybe not have any income, that's going to affect the health and well-being and safety of their animal as well. So we need to, in order to help the animals, it's so important to know that we have to help people, and the people have to come first, because we can't help the animals without helping people first. And so it's so important to be empathetic and compassionate and open-minded. And the idea of like social media as a tool, in my opinion, is a blessing and a curse, because we do see on social media, especially when it comes to animals and animal rescue organizations, is that it's the negative stories that get the attention, right? This is the dog, this is little Timmy that was hit by a car and was left for dead, and we saved him. And that gets the foster homes, that gets the donations, that gets the adopters, all of these sad negative stories about how, we have to save these animals, but we don't focus enough on the good things. And the same thing goes with culls, right? Recently, in the last few years, I've noticed an uptick in, if a cull is going to happen, it gets shared all over social media, and then all these people step in and they want to help, and it's very well meaning. But again, going back to how culls are actually kind of counteracted, it doesn't solve anything. And so the idea of outside groups coming in to fix the dog problem is very colonialized. I would parallel it to, it's very similar to the residential school and the 60 scoop era. And there's a story that I'm going to share in the next slide about why we think that, and how we actually came to that realization. So, there are a lot of misconceptions and assumptions about stray or neglected animals. And I always argue to people when people talk to me and they go, oh my God, yeah, it's so good that you do all this work on the reserves, like all those dogs, they need your help, and those poor animals. And I always say to people, if I was to go knock on, I'm in Prince Albert, so if I was to go knock on every single door in the city of Prince Albert, I guarantee I would find animals that are neglected and not well cared for and overbred and in need of vet care, just because it happens behind closed doors and it's not as open out in the open, because the dogs are free roaming, and there's lots of people that go to First Nations communities to work as contractors or to deliver fuel or groceries or things like that. Sask power workers, they see this and they automatically think, well, like, this dog is hanging out at the store and nobody's claiming it, and it's kind of skinny and it doesn't have a collar, I must save it. And that really grinds my gears. It really gets me going, because I argue to people all the time that that's not the case. And if you actually took a minute to learn something and talk to people and learn about the community and learn about that animal and learn who their home is, you would find that that's not the case. So going back to the idea of outside groups coming in and helping communities, and while it might be well-being or well-meaning, sorry, certain words in language and the way that we talk can be very harmful. So words can be triggering. You know, it's not a secret that many First Nations people and Indigenous people have a lot of trauma and have dealt with a lot of horrible experiences. And we have, you know, a person that's grown up in the city in an urban center that's been blessed with a fairly easygoing life with very little conflict, has no idea, has not even the first clue about what that person goes through on a daily basis, what goes on behind closed doors. And so we have to be careful about the words that we use. And I'll be the first to admit that I had a different perspective about all of this before I started volunteering with CAP on a regular basis. And I was a person that would want to go help the animals. And I was a person that used the word rescue a lot and better life and saved. And through my experiences, you know, having kind of just like open, candid conversations with members of the community and people that work in the community and leadership, I just learned that my original perspective was not true. And so we have to be careful about the words that we use. Like the word call actually is not an Indigenous word. That is a Western word that we've introduced to Indigenous culture. The idea of pull and roundup. Roundup was used in the 60s scoop. And so, you know, social workers and RCMP would go out to First Nations communities and round up the kids. And actually, when I first started volunteering with CAP, the very first clinic that I ever went to in 2014, we used to call our community pickup teams roundup teams. And it wasn't until just actually a few years ago that we learned that Roundup was used in a colonialized way. And so we're like, well, we can't do that. We have to change our language. And so there's a story that I told Monique that I was going to share tonight, and I got her permission to share it. And I remember it. We were working in Minnestickwin Lake Cree Nation. And she was talking to a guy, and this was a house that we had gone to many times over the years. We had a relationship with the pet owners. And they had a litter of puppies, and they had a mom that she was really skinny and her leg was broken. And so we were trying to help offer some resources for them. And they were a little bit apprehensive, which is understandable, because I always try to think about, what if somebody came to my door tomorrow morning, knocked on my door and asked me about my animals, and you know, it could have been insulting the way that they presented themselves. And I probably would have been offended and told them to go somewhere else, right? So we were having this conversation with them, and we were trying to get the pups surrendered so that we could get the mom spayed, and they didn't want to surrender the puppies. And Monique, like, I wasn't there, but she told me about this after, when she came back to the vehicle, was that, you know, she was trying to explain to him, like, these puppies will go off, they'll get foster homes and they'll get vetted. So they'll get all their shots, they'll get dewormed, they'll get spayed, neutered, and then they'll go up for adoption to new homes and they'll have a better life. And she said, kind of in that moment, as that sentence left her mouth, she had this epiphany and realized the gentleman that she was speaking to was probably in his mid-50s. And she goes, oh my God, I bet you anything he is a 60 scoop kid. And I just talked to him like the priests and the nuns and the social workers and the RCMP would have spoken to his parents about taking him from his family and giving him a better life. And it was in that moment that when she shared that story with me, and I shared it with some other volunteers too, and all of our jaws dropped. And we're like, oh my God, you know, we never made that connection before. And so when we talk about even the rescue world, I mean, we call them foster homes because that's what they are. They're temporary foster homes that take care of these animals before we adopt them out to new homes. But right now, when you look at what's going on with the child welfare system and how First Nations are trying to get their children back into Indigenous run child welfare systems and organizations, it's the same thing. Those words, foster home, and adopted and better life, those can all be really triggering to people. So, and we don't know what somebody's gone through. Another thing too, even just spay and neuter, some First Nations cultures and Indigenous people don't believe in altering animals. They don't believe that that is true to nature's way, right? To the creator's way. We're not supposed to touch any of that. If an animal is meant to have babies, then it is meant to have babies. You just don't touch it. Granted, I think now I've kind of seen over the years, people are becoming more open to spay neuter because they do recognize that there are just too many animals, and these animals are just able to breed so much more willingly and easily than in urban settings. But we also have to think about the fact too that just, you know, recently, and it's only, I think, just in the last couple of years that it's kind of come to an end, is the birth alerts for Indigenous mothers and forced sterilization was a really common practice, as I think it ended pretty much in the early 2000s. So it's still very new. And so when we talk about spay and neuter or aborting a pregnancy or terminating a pregnancy, we have to be really conscious about how we bring these topics up and how we say them. So another one that I kind of building on that is that we need to do less talking and more listening. And I'm guilty of that too. And I know Monique is really guilty of that, because if anybody knows Monique, she has the gift of gab. But we need to slow down, and we need to take time, and we need to listen to people and their stories and what they want. When we go to a community, when a community calls us and says, like, can you come help with the dog population? In past years, we used to say, okay, this is what we can do. This is what you need to do. Here's kind of an outline. And that's a very Western way of approaching everything. Whoops, I hit a button. Very Western way of approaching everything. And also, it's not true to Indigenous value and culture, which is talking and storytelling. And so I've learned within myself to just slow down and have really open, candid conversations with people. And I try not to talk at them as much, where there's an information overload with people, right? And I try to think about, like, let's say right now, if I got, you know, some kind of horrible health diagnosis tomorrow, and my doctor was talking to me and was trying to explain all of this to me. And first of all, like, I'm overwhelmed with the fact that he's telling me essentially bad news, but he's also talking in like medical doctor lingo, and I don't understand what he's saying. I'm not going to retain any of that information. And so when you go to talk to somebody and you try to explain to them about, you know, all this vet care stuff and explaining about veterinary care and what the process is going to be, and this foster home thing and the adoption and all that kind of stuff, it can be a lot of information for somebody to take in, especially when you don't know them and you've, like, this is the first time you've talked to them. And it can also be really insulting if somebody speaks to you as if they think you're stupid and they don't think that you understand what you're explaining to them. And so kind of over my years of experiences, like, I've had to kind of listen. That's where the listening comes in, because you have to listen, and then you can kind of gauge how much that person is involved, like, and engaged with this conversation, and how much they understand. Like, they might not have such an in-depth understanding of the animal welfare world and the issues and caring for their pet. So then you can kind of find different ways to cater that conversation and deliver it in a way that's understandable. And it's really important to always ask people, like, do you have questions? Like, am I making sense? Can I explain this to you in a different way? And just take your time. And it's so not like, this next slide, I have a note about it. Like, creating relationships is so important. And it's not uncommon. If you're ever out with Canine Action Project and you're somewhere with Monique, you will likely lose her for 30 to 45 minutes, and you'll be stuck in the vehicle by yourself because she's sitting in somebody's house having tea with them at their table, because she's talking and she's just creating this relationship. And I know, like, I've done it too, where, you know, just actually recently we were bringing dogs home that were just spayed at the university, and I only had like a small handful of houses to stop at, but I was one of the last people to finish dropping my dogs off because I was just having conversations with people and answering questions and engaging in conversation. And so that's really important. And that bridges into creating relationships. So it's really important for animal welfare organizations or veterinarians or anybody that's trying to assist a community with their animal population that you don't just helicopter in and helicopter out. Because first of all, that's not solving anything. And we should be focusing on creating a more long-term sustainable plan. And we should focus on creating these long-term relationships. And not only that, but these relationships should be positive, trusting, and transparent. And respect goes both ways. And so like we often hear people say, you know, oh, I don't trust or respect that person until they give me a reason to do so. But it should go the other way as well, right? Same kind of story as if I just show up at somebody's house and they don't know me and they've never met me and I'm a very white presenting person, why should they trust me? You know? And so you just have to think about that why should I trust this person on my doorstep that says that they're going to do this? And I was telling volunteers about this a couple of years ago because I kind of had another little epiphany in my life where we do a lot of spay, neuter, and return programs. And so, you know, CAP is very fortunate that we've been working in our communities for many years. And actually next year, we're going to start taking on some new ones. So we're going to have to start building these relationships and all this trust that we've been so fortunate to have for so many years because we've been continually in the same communities. But so one of our programs is we work with the vet college and we spay 45 female dogs. So we have to transport them to the vet college. They stay there for 5 days and then they come home. And in like what other scenario where some stranger that you don't know shows up on your doorstep and says, I'll fix your dog for you, but you have to give it to me for 5 days. And I promise I'll bring it back. Like if somebody said that to me, would I believe them? It's hard to say. So I think we all kind of just, everybody has to always just take a step back, right? And we always try to have to put the shoe on the other foot and try to see how we would be, like what the perspective would be if we were in somebody else's shoes and how we would want to be approached. And like I said, respect goes both ways. We have to be respectful of the community. We have to be respectful of the person that we're speaking to. We have to be respectful of the cultures and the traditions and the beliefs that are in that community. We have to be respectful of people's time, like with veterinarians and things like that. Like they're so overloaded that we can't just expect all vet clinics to give a massive discount and spay and neuter 20 dogs for us. Like that's not respectful, and that's also it's not reasonable to expect that either. And so the ultimate goal with Canine Action Project, and what really should be everybody's ultimate goal, is that we want to increase animal health literacy. We want animals to be healthier in these communities because we know in turn that is going to create a healthier space, a safer space, a happier space for the people, for the visitors, for the people that work there. We want to reduce negative dog to human interactions. So we want to reduce those bite incidents or, you know, for example, I've had scabies twice from dogs that have had mange. So we want to try to reduce that. We don't want to have zoonotic diseases and parasites contracting back and forth between species. We want to create a more manageable and sustainable dog population. Because like I said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So we want people to become more empowered. We want people to have responsibility for their animals. We want people to be proud of their animals and take pride in them. But we also want to give people tools and resources to be able to do that. We can't just tell them to be a good pet owner and then expect them to know what that means. It's important to know that each community has unique beliefs and views about their history with dogs. Like I said, some communities you go to, some First Nations communities do have bylaws and they do require their animals to be contained, whether that's tied up or fenced in. Some don't. And some are elder run communities and they don't have, you know, a chief and council that really runs everything. Like on paper, they have a chief and council, but the elder community or the elder committee is what makes the decision. It's important to build and maintain these positive, trusting relationships. And through that, we can encourage responsible pet ownership. And again, increasing overall health well-being and safety in the community is this is all part of the ultimate goal. I think it's important to recognize that animals are healing and therapy for everybody. Doesn't matter what background you are, what color you are, where you grew up, where you came from. It's so important. Animals bring us so much joy and so much happiness, and it's scientifically proven that cats purring is a stress reliever, and that walking your dog or spending time with your dog reduces your stress levels. So it's important to recognize that, you know, these animals are very important to people in these communities as well. And that we want to try to strengthen and reconnect that human animal bond. And for some people, that's been lost through colonization. And so we got to try to find ways that we can reignite that spark again. And for CAP, I mean, this is our goal, but it should be everybody's goal as well, is that CAP, I feel like CAP is the bridge between, you know, giving pet owners kind of that opportunity to access vet care that they may not have been able to access before, whether or not that is through finances or through transportation, or just that's kind of a foreign idea to them, taking their pets to the vet. Like even when I was a kid, we never took our dogs to the vet. We never vaccinated our dogs. We never spayed our dogs. And now that's becoming more of a norm. And so when CAP has programs and we can provide those programs to pet owners, then they can walk into the vet office and now they can ask that vet questions, and that's creating a relationship. And we've actually seen over the years with our programs that the people that bring their animals in for our subsidized spay neuter programs are bringing their animals back for wellness and for tick meds. And, you know, like it's opened that door, I guess, for people that maybe didn't feel like it was obtainable to them before. But also there needs to be a bridge between the rescues, you know, that come in and do help with the communities, and they do play a valuable role, right? But it has to be done right, and it has to be done properly and with respect. And for people that are not familiar with how things work in the First Nations, like I said, there's so many people that tell me, I don't know how you do that. Oh, those poor dogs, and they're all strays. And it's about providing that information and that knowledge to people that that's not how it is. And like, come out with us for a day. Come with me for a day and spend a couple hours, and let's go talk to people and meet their dogs, and you can learn and maybe change some of your perspectives, or maybe it'll answer some of your questions that you have. So that's kind of the ultimate goal in a nutshell of what everybody should be doing, and that it's all done with respect, and that we need to educate ourselves, right? We have to continually learn about the history and the reason why things are the way that they are today, and how we can work together moving forward. Not we're going to come in and we're going to fix your problem. We need to work together. And so that kind of that's kind of the end of my presentation. Our website's listed there. We're always looking for more volunteers. Like I said, we've got a spay neuter clinic coming up here in September, so the call out for that will be coming pretty quick here. And we've got other projects coming up, other on-site things that we do in the community. We're always doing outreach. So if anyone's interested in volunteering or coming to help out, shoot us an email. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Megan. That was a very thought-provoking presentation, and please extend a thank you to Monique for wanting to be here. And we do have some questions.
Okay.
Elder Betty, I would invite you to turn your camera on if you're able, as I believe some of these questions are aimed at you as well. We'll start with a simple question first, and this one I think is for you, Megan. One of the questions in the chat was, what are the dogs' names? What are your dogs' names that are in the room with you?
Oh, Max and Molly are in here, and Susie's out with my husband. So Max
Cool.
and Molly are like, I call them my hemorrhoids because they go everywhere with me.
That's a good name.
My
then,
computer says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Oh, well, that is
my video did
interesting.
disappear for a second too, but now it's back. So
I can't turn my camera on. It won't turn on.
Well,
So it has to be your end that you turned it off, not mine.
Oh, I think. Here. There we go. Now we're rocking and rolling. And do we still have you, Megan?
There we go. I think so. Yep.
There we go.
There.
All right. Here's a question, and maybe this is a question that you both can answer. Elder Betty, we'll start with you. The question is, what is the traditional interplay or association with Indigenous peoples and dogs, and how has or has not this traditional association been lost in relation to community dogs?
Well, traditionally, our dogs were our helpers. And a lot of times people think that they're like an offshoot from the wolf, but they really weren't. As I understand it, that there had been a need when when we stepped out of Mother Earth, our bodies, there's a story of us stepping out of Mother Earth, once Turtle Island was born. And there was a need for us to have a companion. And so the wolf had heard the plea that the people had made that they needed a companion, and they were following their food source. So for people on the plains, it would have been the moose tooth, which a lot of people call bison. And so when the wolves heard that, they said it would be a good thing if it had a lot of endurance, like we do, if it had a shape like we do. And so they had virtually said, this is what you could have as a companion, something that looks like us, almost the same, and you can have it with you and it'll do all the things you needed to do. When you had something that you thought was poisonous, feed it to the dog, you'd know that you can't eat it, right? Those things, those were how that dog helped communities, and those dogs followed those communities, just like we followed the food source. So those dogs had lent themselves to us to be our guides, our helpers, our companion, and we have no other companion like a dog. I have never been without a dog. I have 2 little dogs. And when we were kids up north, we had dogs. We had worker dogs and we had pets. We had one that stayed in the house, and we had the workers were outside. They pulled the sleigh. They took us across the ice when we picked up our traps and whatnot. So those dogs, they were fed before we were in the morning. You get up, you feed your dog. That's your duty. You feed that dog because that dog takes care of you. That dog would protect you no matter what. And that they'll give up their life for you. And you don't have to have it sleeping on your bed or under your bed or in your house. Those dogs were outside, but they'd give up their lives for us if they thought we needed it when we hitched them to that sleigh. And they took care of us. They took us out there and they brought us back safely. They're something that is the shape of a wolf. They howl like a wolf during certain times, and they have this spirit within them, this dog spirit that we have, that you can't compare it to another animal. You just can't. And I'd never be without a dog. Never. It would be the loneliest thing in the world without a dog. It would be so, I couldn't imagine how lonely it would be, because I've never been without a dog. I've always had one. That's our traditional belief of our dogs.
Thank you. Megan?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Elder Betty. And going back to, how important it is to have animals in our lives and how much joy they bring us. I just actually had a woman tell me last week that her son had passed away, and this dog that we were picking up to get spayed and vaccinated and everything, she's like, please take good care of her because she helped my daughter through the loss of her brother. And so animals are very important. And I think, just with the history of colonization, I mean, Indigenous people lost so much already that to try to take their animals away, and we know that these animals are healing, is we can't do that. And so they are very important. And yeah, Elder Betty made a good point that there are, in a lot of scenarios, not just in First Nations communities, but there are working dogs and there are pets. And that's still very true today. It's not just something of quote unquote the past. That's still very true today. And we have to, I think that goes back to the question of like, oh, what is a good pet owner, right? And everybody, that's subjective. And like I said, not every dog wants to be on the couch and be in the house with you.
Thank you, Megan. Elder Betty, the question has come to you and to me as well. So the question is, do you have pets and what are their names? And that question has been asked to both of us, so I will let you go first.
Yes, I have pets. I have a 2-year-old, and her name is Jeannie, and she's part Papillon, part Shih Tzu. And I have a 6-month-old Shih Tzu, and her name is Maisie.
Very nice dogs, it sounds like. I also have 2 dogs and 2 cats as well. So I have Shotzi, who is 11 years old this year, and Lady, who is 2. And then my 2 cats, I have Ewing, who is also 10 this year, and then Toot, who is, I think he's 5 now. And so yes, those are my fur kids, as they say. Nofa is in the chat, Elder Betty, and says she has met your dogs and they are adorable.
I also have a pet crow called Jane.
Oh, that's cool. And Jane comes to visit you?
She comes to visit every day, lets me know that she's hungry, or she'll knock on the door to let me know time to go feed her. Yeah.
That's neat. Very cool. Another question here, Megan, maybe this one is more for you, and then we can turn it over to Elder Betty as well. And I do know we're here at the end of our time, so we will keep that in mind. And if you do have to leave, we appreciate that. This is being recorded, so you can watch the recordings later. And so the question is, can you talk about the term rescue and what it might mean regarding white saviorism? For example, what are you rescuing them from, etc.? Megan?
Yeah, I've actually, I try not to use the term rescue anymore, especially when I'm working in First Nations communities, because I actually do find it insulting. And like I said, my perspective was different in the beginning, and I thought that I needed to help rescue all these animals, and I thought they needed to be rescued. And then throughout my years of experience and learning and growing, that the animals are probably happier than most urban settings. And we've actually seen that, where some dogs do get quote unquote into the rescue system and they don't do well and they shut down and their mental health is not good. And so for some of those animals, we've either spayed and neutered or returned them, as long as they had somebody to provide for them. Or, I mean, sometimes the organization that took them on had to make the decision to euthanize them because they were not rehabilitatable. And so, yeah, the question is, what are you saving them from? What are you rescuing them from? They don't all need to be rescued. And the reality is there's no room to rescue them all. Like foster homes, shelters, SPCAs, rescues, everybody is full to the brim. And you will see it every single day that there are requests and upon requests, and groups are turning people away on the daily, probably 10 requests a day, because there's literally no space for them. And you can't intake anything if nothing's being adopted, because there's no room for anything else to come in. And so I think we need to shift our focus to, as opposed to rescuing and saving everything, which is not the answer and is quite honestly insulting, that we need to focus on how can we give this person and their animal the best possible life that they can have together? How can we help them do that? And so I think that's going to be the shift now, especially since COVID and with everybody being so full. It's not possible So we're gonna have to try to shift our focus and shift the way we do things and help people be successful. And that's the ultimate goal.
Mhm. Yes, your comment about animals being taken into the foster system and kind of shutting down. I mean, the very different circumstances here, but I know one of my dogs, Shotzi, she's very much my wife's dog. I mean, they're always together. And if my wife travels for work or something and she's gone for a couple of days, Shotzi will stop eating, she'll stop drinking. And it's just because she misses her person, right? And so we kind of have to bring out little treats to entice her to eat. And as soon as my wife comes home, I mean, Shotzi's back to normal and she's eating and everything. So I mean, certainly removing the animal from their person certainly does have an impact on them for sure.
And it has an impact on the person,
Yeah.
right? We don't often like think about and go back to the impact that it has on that person, whether it's an adult or a child or an elderly person, like that's their pet, right?
Mhm.
So, and they had
Yeah.
a bond.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I tell
Um,
you something?
please, yes.
I had a little dog and she lived for 19 years and she passed away very suddenly. And then we got another little dog because my husband was so upset not having a dog around. So within 2 weeks, we've got another dog. And she was just a puppy and she was his dog. And this little dog, when my husband passed away, she passed away 6 days later. She was only 4 years old, but she quit eating, she quit drinking. 6 days after he died, she died.
Wow.
And that's
Wow.
why I only have a 2-year-old now, because
Mhm.
there was I had to get another dog, right?
Yeah,
Right. So yeah. So
that
yeah, you
might,
take that person away from that dog and that's their safety. And there's no more safety. And they just give up.
yeah, that
She
might
was
be the,
completely healthy. She just gave up.
Yeah, can I piggyback on that too, Elder Betty? There was a situation that actually we recently dealt with a member in Sweetgrass First Nation that we know really well. Um, she had a dog that we had fixed years ago, and he was he was the elder dog in the community. Everybody respected him. And he got quilled really bad. And so we helped her out with the vet bill, got him to the vet, whatever. He ended up getting quilled again, but he took off for a couple days. And so when he came back, his face was really swollen and he needed more vet care. It costed more, right? More antibiotics, all that kind of stuff. And so she did it again. He got quilled a third time. And at that point, she had said to the vet clinic, she's like, you know what? There's a reason why he's doing this. He's doing this because he's trying to take some pain away from me. And I don't know what that pain is right now. So at home, they tried to pull the quills the best that they could. And actually, what happened was just like a week later, she found out that she was pregnant and she had suffered a miscarriage. And so she's like, he did that so that he could take that pain away from me and he could take it on because he was my protector. And he ended up actually passing away not long after she had suffered that miscarriage. And so I do think that, there's such a strong connection and such a strong bond between people and their animals. And it is true that in Indigenous history and culture that animals do try to take the pain away and try to suffer the pain so that the person doesn't have to.
yes, that, yeah, that's definitely a strong story there. Um, I think we'll come to our last question here, and this one's for you, Megan. Does CAP have a responsible pet ownership educational information or any responsible pet ownership educational info that you share with communities, and is it shared anywhere?
Yeah, we do, there's not a whole lot like really on paper. We do have a couple handouts that we give out to communities. We need to do a lot of updating to our website right now. That's our summer project. So it will be available on the website. It's just not right now, but it's just a handout about the importance of vaccines, spay neuter, deworming, lice, fleas, ticks, dog houses, shelter, things like that. So it's developed. It's more, we do have more conversation than we do actually have physical information in our hands, but we do have it. It's just not up available yet, but it will be.
And your website address?
Is canineactionproject.com.
Cool. Well, thank you, Megan, and thank you, Elder Betty. Really quick, Megan, do you have any parting thoughts for our guests this evening?
No, there was a lot of familiar names in the attendees, so that made me smile. And again, thank you so much for having us there. And I really enjoyed Elder Betty's presentation as well and her story. So I'm really glad that I got to be a part of that as well.
Thank you for being here, Megan. And Elder Betty, closing thoughts?
I think people should remember that their loved ones include those four-legged ones, and to treat them as such. Treasure them
Absolutely.
every day you have them.
100% agree with you on that. So once again, thank you everybody for being here this evening. Thank you to our presenters, Elder Betty McKenna, Megan Schmitz. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And again, this will be recorded, so you can follow our social media channels on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for updates on when this will be posted to our YouTube channel, and you can rewatch it there. Good night, everybody, and thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Good night.